At my niece's sweet 16 that I paid for, my mom said, "This party is cheap and embarrassing. We'd be better off without you." When I simply nodded and said, "In that case, I'll stop paying their bills." My mom. My childhood is marked by one phrase, and one phrase only. Think of your brother. Like when I was 11 and won $200 in a school art contest. But when I showed my parents the check, my mom just frowned and said, "Your brother Michael didn't win anything. You should share this with him." A wave of guilt crashed over me and I handed Michael $50. But instead of thanking me, he pouted. "Only 50? My mom sighed and told me to think of my brother, and I ended up giving him $125. Deep down, I knew it wasn't fair. It was my artwork, my achievement. But I did it anyway, because their approval mattered more than my feelings. Fast forward to last month when I turned 32. For the first time in my life, I had real savings. A promotion at work meant I finally had disposable income, which might not sound like much, but to someone who grew up being the family wallet, it felt like freedom. And of course, I wanted to share my good fortune. So when my nephew Sophia's sweet 16 approached, I went all out. I spent $5,000 on the venue, DJ, photographer, decorations, a 3-tier custom cake, and even hired a makeup artist for him and his friends. On the way to the party, I kept telling myself that this would finally show them I wasn't selfish. This would prove I was a good aunt, a good sister, a good daughter. But of course, my hopes were shattered, because after the party, as I was helping pack up decorations, Michael cornered me in the parking lot. "Did you see Caden's party photos on Instagram last month?" I stared at him blankly, and he just scoffed. His aunt spent $10,000. He had a live band and a champagne fountain. I heard footsteps, and suddenly my mom was beside him. They both stood with their arms crossed, and my mom told me that if I was going to be cheap and embarrass Sophia in front of his friends, then I shouldn't have bothered at all. And before I could point out that Sophia had been glowing with happiness all night, Michael chimed in. "Do you know what they're saying at school? They're calling it the budget party. He's being bullied because you couldn't spend a few more dollars." I did the math in my head, because I always kept track. You see, over the years, I'd paid for Michael's wedding tux, $2,000, helped with his mortgage down payment, $10,000, and covered Sophia's tutoring for 3 years. Still, Michael acted like I was the world's greatest disappointment. And I know this might sound pathetic, but I wasn't even angry at first. I just felt tears sting my eyes. My fingers clutched my car keys tighter, remembering the thank you card I'd hoped to receive. And as I stood there being berated, they kept going. "You just got that promotion. You're making good money now. But you're too selfish to properly celebrate your only nephew's milestone?" In an instant, my sadness turned to anger. I stared at their entitled faces. Not once during the party had either of them thanked me. Not once had they offered to help with costs. They just showed up, criticized the decorations, and complained the cake wasn't from the trendy bakery across town. I took a deep breath and asked them a simple question. "What did you two contribute to the party?" Michael rolled his eyes. "I'm his father. My presence is my contribution." I kept a completely stoic expression. "And what about Sophia's birthday last year? Or the year before that?" They both looked uncomfortable, because we all knew the answer. I'd paid for those parties too. Well, that was enough for me. I turned and walked toward my car. The second I turned the corner, I stopped. I thought back to all the times I'd emptied my wallet for them. All the times I'd gone without so they could have more. I think that moment was the first time I actually let myself see the truth. And for once, I wanted to do something about it. I turned around and marched back. Michael was already on his phone, probably complaining about me to someone. "One more thing," I said. "Who paid for Sophia's braces?" "Insurance," Michael answered dismissively. I smiled. "What insurance? The one I pay for?" His face went white. "What about his school uniforms? His soccer fees? His summer camp?" The smirk was wiped from his face as he realized it was all me, and that's when my mom tried to intervene. "Now, honey, family helps family. Really? Then where's my help? Where's my party? When's the last time either of you spent a dime on me?" They both turned to look at each other, and had the "oh wait" look plastered on their faces. You see, I'd been covering for them for years. Telling Dad that Michael was contributing to household expenses. Telling Michael that Mom was helping with Sophia's expenses. Creating a web of lies to keep the peace while I paid for everything. I didn't even stick around to watch it unravel. I just left. And even though I felt like a weight had been lifted, it was still really hard. So I spent the entire night alternating between relief and grief. And when I woke up, I noticed my phone had been bombarded with dozens of texts and missed calls. The first voicemail was angry, calling me a selfish brat who ruined Sophia's reputation. By the 10th, they were practically begging, suddenly remembering my birthday was coming up and promising to make it special this year. I had no idea what they had in mind. The next morning, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and the screen lit up with notification after notification. 47 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from Michael and Mom. I sat up in bed and started scrolling through the messages, watching them shift from angry to desperate in real time. The first few called me selfish and ungrateful. Then around message 15, the tone changed to "please just talk to us, and we need to work this out as a family." My chest felt tight but also kind of empty at the same time. like I was watching this happen to someone else. The guilt started creeping in through the cracks, whispering that maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should just apologize and make things easier for everyone. I forced myself to open the voicemail app because I needed to hear the actual words, not just read sanitized text versions. The first voicemail from Michael started playing and his voice was sharp and mean. He called me a cheap embarrassment who clearly didn't care about family. I skipped ahead to the fifth one, which was from Mom using her sad voice, the one she always used when she wanted me to feel bad. She talked about how family helps family, and how disappointed she was that I would abandon them over something so small. The latest voicemail was from Michael again, and this time his tone was almost friendly. He mentioned making my birthday really special this year if I would just do the right thing and help out more. I took screenshots of the call log, documenting the pattern of angry to desperate to manipulative. Seeing it laid out like that made the manipulation so obvious that I couldn't unsee it anymore. I got out of bed and walked to my kitchen table, opening my laptop with shaking hands. For 2 hours, I sat there creating a spreadsheet of every single payment I'd made for Michael, Mom, and Sophia over the past 10 years. I went through old bank statements, credit card bills, Venmo transactions, everything I could find. The wedding tux, the mortgage down payment, 3 years of tutoring, soccer fees, summer camps, school uniforms, birthday parties, emergency car repairs that somehow always happened to Michael's car. Never mine. When I added up the final total, the number made me stop breathing for a second. $47,000. Not counting the insurance I still pay that covers Sophia. I stared at that number and realized I could have bought a house with that money. Instead, I was living in a small apartment while funding their entire lives. My hands were shaking. So hard I had to put them flat on the table. I opened a new text message to the family group chat and started typing out boundaries. No more emergency requests. No more guilt trips. No more expecting me to fund everything while pretending other people were contributing. My finger hovered over the send button for 20 minutes while my brain went to war with itself. The old voice kept whispering, "Think of your brother." And I realized I wasn't ready to actually send this message yet. I needed more than just anger to hold this boundary. I needed a plan and maybe some support. I closed the messaging app without sending anything. Then I logged into my credit monitoring service because a new fear had just hit me. What if Mom or Michael had my banking information from all those emergency transfers over the years? What if they could just take money directly? I checked every account I had access to, my pulse racing the whole time. Everything looked clean so far. No weird transactions or accounts I didn't recognize. But I immediately changed all my passwords anyway, making them complex and different for every account. I wrote down a note to check if I was listed on any accounts I didn't personally open. At work the next day, I couldn't focus during our project meeting. Troy kept glancing at me with this concerned look on his face. During lunch break, he asked if I was okay. I gave him the short version about family drama over party expenses, leaving out most of the details because I wasn't ready to say everything out loud yet. Troy listened without jumping in with advice or telling me what I should do. Then he mentioned his sister went through something similar with boundary issues and found therapy really helpful. He said it in this casual way that didn't make me feel judged or broken. That night I couldn't sleep because my brain kept playing this loop of every time someone said, "Think of your brother," in my life. I was 11 again, handing over my art contest money. I was 23, giving up my study abroad program because Michael needed rent money. I was 28, working 2 jobs during grad school while Michael complained about being tired from his one part-time position. Each memory connected to the next one like links in a chain, and I finally saw the pattern clearly. This wasn't occasional helping between family members. This was training. Systematic training to put everyone else's needs above my own, starting from childhood and never stopping. The clarity hurt almost as much as the memories themselves. Instead of just accepting Michael's claim that Sophia was bullied over the budget party, I decided I needed to verify this myself. I remembered that Sophia's school has a parent portal, and I technically have access since I've been the one paying for everything. I logged in and searched for any counselor notes or incident reports about bullying. There was nothing. No reports, no meetings, no documentation of any social problems related to the party. I spent the next hour scrolling through Sophia's social media accounts and looking at the party photos he posted. In every single picture, he looked genuinely happy. His friends were laughing and dancing and having fun. The comment section was full of people saying things like, "Best party ever," and "So fun," and "Wish I could have stayed longer." Not one comment mocked the decorations or called it cheap or made any reference to it being a budget party. The bullying narrative Michael had used to guilt me was completely made up. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, letting that sink in. Then I made a decision. A firm one this time, not one I would second-guess in 20 minutes. I was suspending any new financial payments to Michael or Mom while I figured out my next steps. The insurance that covers Sophia was already paid through the end of the year, so I wasn't cutting off a teenager's health care. But I wasn't handing over another dollar until I had clear boundaries in place, and maybe some professional help figuring out how to hold them. The mix of terror and relief in my chest felt strange, but also kind of right, like I was finally doing something that actually protected me instead of just keeping everyone else comfortable. I lie in bed staring at the ceiling while my brain plays the same horrible movie on repeat. I'm 11 again. watching Michael spend my art contest money on video games while I pretended it was fine. I'm 19, telling my study abroad coordinator that I had to withdraw from the Paris program because of a family emergency, which was code for Michael needing rent money and mom saying I should think of my brother. I'm 23, working the morning shift at a coffee shop and the evening shift at a bookstore during grad school, while Michael posted Instagram photos from his afternoon naps with captions about being exhausted from his one part-time job at a clothing store. Each memory connects to the next one like a chain I never noticed I was wearing, and now that I see it clearly, I can't stop counting the links. The study abroad program cost me $8,000 in lost deposits and the experience of a lifetime. The double jobs during grad school meant I graduated with worse grades than I should have earned because I was too tired to focus on my thesis. The art contest money was just the beginning. The first time I learned that my achievements only mattered if they could benefit Michael, and every time after that just reinforced the same lesson until it became automatic. I finally fall asleep around 4 a.m. and wake up 3 hours later to my phone buzzing. I grab it off the nightstand and see a voicemail notification from Mom, timestamp 2:08 a.m. I press play, and her voice comes through sounding soft and sweet, totally different from the angry tone she used in the parking lot. She talks about how family misunderstandings happen, and maybe we all got a little heated, and then she mentions my birthday coming up in a few weeks. Her voice gets even sweeter as she says they want to make it really special this year. Maybe take me to that nice restaurant downtown I've always wanted to try, so we can work through this whole situation together like a family should. The manipulation is so obvious now that I've started paying attention. I replay the voicemail twice just to make sure I'm hearing it right, and yeah, she's definitely dangling my birthday like a carrot to get me back in line. The thing is, in 32 years they've never made my birthday about me without me planning and funding the whole thing myself. Last year I organized dinner at a restaurant I liked, made the reservation, showed up, and then got stuck with the bill for everyone including Michael's family of 3. The year before that I didn't plan anything and nobody else did either, so my birthday just passed like a regular Tuesday. But now suddenly they want to make it special, right after I stopped being their personal ATM. I sit up in bed and open my laptop. I type, Therapist's Family Dynamics Boundary Setting into the search bar and start scrolling through profiles. Most of them have generic bios about helping families communicate better, but then I find one named Emmeline Robles, whose profile specifically mentions helping people break free from enmeshment and people-pleasing patterns. I read through her approach and it's like she's describing my exact situation without knowing me. She talks about how some family systems train one person to be responsible for everyone else's needs, and how learning to set boundaries feels impossible when you've been programmed since childhood to put others first. I click the appointment button before I can talk myself out of it, and book an intake session for Thursday afternoon. Reading her profile makes me feel like maybe I'm not crazy for thinking this situation isn't normal, like maybe there are other people who've dealt with this same thing and actually found a way out. I close my laptop and sit there thinking about Dad. He's always been the peacekeeper who stays completely out of money discussions, and I don't actually know if he has any idea how much I've been covering for everyone. Part of me wants to show him the spreadsheet and tell him everything, but another part is scared of blowing up the family mythology we've all been maintaining. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he just tells me to work it out with Mom like he always does when there's conflict? What if he knew all along and just didn't care? I spend the whole afternoon at work distracted by these questions, barely paying attention during meetings. When I get home that evening, I pull out a notebook and start writing. I title the page Non-Negotiables, and then stare at the blank lines for a while before I start filling them in. No surprise requests for money, I write. No guilt-tripping about family obligations. Complete transparency about who's paying for what. Monthly cap on any help I choose to give. The words look strange on paper, like rules for dealing with strangers instead of my own family. But seeing the boundaries written down makes them feel more real, and less like something I'll abandon the first time someone cries or gets angry at me. I read through the list 3 times and add one more line at the bottom. All financial discussions must be in writing. No more ambush conversations in parking lots or late-night phone calls. I wake up the next morning to my phone exploding with notifications from the family group chat. I open it and see that Mom has posted a bunch of old photos from when Michael and I were kids. Pictures of us at birthday parties and holidays with captions about happy family memories. Michael has sent several messages comparing me to other aunts who really show up for their nephews, with specific examples of expensive gifts and trips they've funded. I read 3 messages before my chest gets tight and I can't breathe right. I mute all notifications from the chat, and then I turn off my phone completely. I sit in my kitchen for 2 hours just breathing without the constant pressure of their messages coming through. When I finally turn my phone back on, there are 15 more messages I don't read. I look up Sophia's school phone number and call during my lunch break. The receptionist answers and I explain that I'm Sophia's aunt, and I've been helping with expenses, and I'm concerned about reports of bullying related to his birthday party. She's professional and doesn't ask for details, just says she'll connect me with the school counselor. A woman named Judy Nguyen picks up and we schedule a meeting for tomorrow afternoon to discuss any concerns about Sophia's well-being in a confidential setting. After work, I meet Troy at the coffee shop near our office. He suggested it this morning when he noticed I looked stressed, and I'm grateful to talk to someone who isn't part of my family drama. I tell him the fuller story, including the $47,000 total, and the fake bullying claims, and the 2 a.m. voicemail about making my birthday special. Troy listens without interrupting and then says it sounds like financial exploitation rather than normal family helping. He suggests I write out a formal boundary statement that I can send when I'm ready. Something clear and unemotional that doesn't leave room for negotiation or guilt trips. The practical advice helps me feel less alone. Like maybe this is actually something I can handle instead of just a mess I created by being selfish. That evening, I search for financial advisors and find one named Harvey Combs, who specializes in helping people audit their finances and set up protective systems. I book a consultation for next week. I need to know exactly where my money is going, set up alerts for unusual activity, and create a structure that makes it impossible for me to cave during emotional manipulation attempts. The appointment confirmation email makes me feel like I'm actually taking steps instead of just thinking about taking steps. My first therapy session with Emmeline happens on Thursday afternoon. I sit in her office and tell her the basics, and she immediately starts identifying patterns I didn't even know had names. She talks about parentification, which is when a child is forced to take on adult responsibilities for their siblings. She mentions golden child dynamics, where one child is favored and another is trained to serve the favored one. She explains enmeshment, where family members don't have clear boundaries between their needs and your needs. Every term she uses feels like she's describing my exact childhood, and I start crying without meaning to, because someone finally understands what happened to me. At the end of the session, she gives me homework that sounds simple but feels impossible. Take a 72-hour pause before making any financial decisions involving family, no matter how urgent they claim it is. The point is to respond from clarity instead of trained guilt, to give myself time to think instead of just reacting the way I've been programmed to react since I was 11 years old. My phone buzzed that afternoon while I was still processing everything Emmeline had told me. Dad's name lit up the screen. I answered and heard his voice, quieter than usual, asking if we could talk about some kind of problem Mom had mentioned. He didn't sound angry or accusatory, just concerned, like he genuinely wanted to understand what was happening. I agreed to meet him at the diner near his house tomorrow morning because maybe it was finally time to stop protecting everyone with my lies and show him the actual numbers. After we hung up, I printed out the spreadsheet I'd made, all 10 pages showing every payment organized by year and category, and I put it in a folder so I wouldn't chicken out before the meeting. That night I was making dinner when someone started pounding on my apartment door. The knocking was loud and aggressive, and I heard Michael's voice calling through the door that we needed to settle this like adults. I looked through the peephole and saw his face, red and angry, and something in me just clicked that I was done rewarding his ambush tactics. I pulled out my phone and texted him through the door that I wasn't available right now and he needed to leave or I'd call building security. He knocked a few more times, getting louder, and I watched through the peephole as he finally stomped away down the hallway. My hands were shaking, but I felt proud of myself for not opening that door, for not letting him bully his way into my space and my time. The next morning, I got to the diner early and ordered coffee, trying to calm my nerves. Dad arrived exactly on time and slid into the booth across from me, looking tired and confused. I didn't wait for small talk. I just pulled out the folder and slid the spreadsheet across the table. All those pages showing $47,000 in payments over 10 years, plus the insurance I currently pay for Sophia. Dad's face went pale as he started reading through the entries. His finger traced down the columns, stopping at the bigger numbers like the $10,000 mortgage down payment and the 3 years of tutoring costs. He looked up at me and admitted he had no idea the extent of what I'd been covering because Mom always told him Michael was handling things and I was just helping occasionally. I watched him flip through more pages, his expression getting more shocked with each one, and I realized he genuinely hadn't known. He sat quietly for a long moment, staring at the numbers, before he started talking about how he'd enabled this whole dynamic by staying out of money discussions and assuming everything was fine. His voice got rough when he promised to have a direct conversation with Mom about the real financial situation. He said he wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem, and while I was cautious about believing things would actually change, having one family member acknowledge reality felt like real progress. We talked for another hour about specific instances, and Dad kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Later that week, I had my consultation with Harvey Combs at his office downtown. He pulled up my bank accounts on his computer and we went through everything line by line. He helped me cancel all the automatic payments I'd set up to family members over the years, little monthly transfers that added up to hundreds of dollars. We set up alerts for any charges over $50 so I'd get notified immediately if anything unusual happened. Then he created a separate savings account at a different bank, one that nobody in my family knew about, and we transferred a chunk of money there as my emergency fund that couldn't be touched by guilt or manipulation. Harvey helped me establish a monthly gift budget of $200 maximum that I could choose to use or not, and he explained that having these systems in place would make boundary holding much easier than relying on willpower alone when someone was crying or angry. I left his office feeling like I'd just put on armor, like I'd created actual protection instead of just hoping I'd be strong enough to say no next time. That evening, I spent time on my phone checking social media more carefully. I looked at Sophia's recent posts from the past few weeks, scrolling through photos of him with his friends at the school and on weekends. I checked his friends' accounts too, looking for any evidence of the bullying Michael had claimed was happening because of my budget party. What I found was completely normal teenage social media activity. There were no mean comments about the party, no posts mocking the decorations or calling anything cheap. Just typical high school drama about who was dating who and complaints about homework. Nothing that had anything to do with my party budget. I took screenshots of several posts where Sophia's friends had commented positive things about the party, just in case I needed proof later that Michael had been lying. The meeting with Judy Nguyen at Sophia's school happened the next afternoon. I sat in her small office surrounded by motivational posters while she pulled up Sophia's file on her computer. She explained that Sophia had been dealing with some social anxiety and academic pressure, but the bullying narrative about the party was significantly inflated. Judy showed me notes from her recent sessions with Sophia, where he'd actually told her the party was great, and he had fun with his friends. She said the real issue was Michael constantly comparing Sophia to other kids, and making him feel like nothing was ever good enough, like he should be embarrassed about being happy with what he had. Judy looked at me directly and said that sometimes parents project their own insecurities onto their kids, and that seemed to be what was happening here. After the school meeting, I sat in my car for a few minutes before texting Sophia directly. I asked if we could talk privately about everything that had been happening. He called me within an hour and his voice sounded relieved, like he'd been waiting for someone to ask him directly instead of talking about him. Sophia admitted that he'd loved the party and felt special all night, that his friends had thought everything was amazing and fun. But then his dad had started comparing it to other parties, showing him photos from Instagram of celebrations that cost more money, making him feel embarrassed about being happy with only $5,000 worth of celebration. Hearing this from Sophia himself broke my heart, while also confirming everything I'd suspected about Michael's manipulation. Sophia asked me not to tell his dad we'd talked because he didn't want things to get worse at home, and I promised to keep our conversation private, while also encouraging him to keep meeting with Judy at the school. That evening, I opened my laptop and started writing the boundary email I'd been planning. I addressed it to both Michael and Mom, keeping my language clear and unemotional. I stated that future gifts would be capped at reasonable amounts I choose, that there would be no more emergency funding without full transparency about the actual situation, and that all financial discussions must include honesty about who has paid for what in the past. I wrote that these boundaries were final and not up for negotiation, that I was done being the family ATM while being treated like I was selfish. I read it over 3 times, checking for any language that sounded defensive or apologetic, making sure every word was firm and clear. Then I hit send before I could second-guess myself into deleting it and pretending everything was fine. My email notification dinged less than an hour later. Mom had responded with a long message full of stories about my childhood, about how family takes care of family, and we all make sacrifices for the people we love. She brought up times when she'd helped me as a kid, conveniently forgetting that parents are supposed to provide for their children. Her email was full of subtle implications that I was being selfish and hurtful, that I was destroying our family over money, that I'd regret this when I was older and alone. I read it once and felt the familiar guilt rising in my chest, that old programming trying to take over and make me apologize. But I didn't let myself read it again, or analyze every sentence looking for hidden meanings. I just typed a single response, 6 words that took all my strength to write. My decision is final. Then I closed my email app and turned off my phone notifications to resist the urge to keep checking for responses, to stop myself from over-explaining or defending my choices, or trying to make them understand why I had to do this. 2 days passed in this weird quiet where I kept my phone mostly off and focused on work. But then my cousin Jessica texted asking if everything was okay, because she'd seen Michael's Facebook post. I opened the app and there it was, this vague complaint about how some people get a little success and suddenly forget where they came from, forget the family that supported them through everything. The post had 47 likes and a bunch of comments from relatives I barely talked to, all saying things like "so true" and "family should come first," and "some people just don't appreciate what they have." I sat there staring at my phone screen, and my fingers literally hovered over the keyboard because I wanted to comment with receipts, wanted to post my spreadsheet showing $47,000 in payments, and ask who exactly forgot where they came from. But I made myself close the app instead and texted Jessica back that I was fine, and dealing with some family stuff. And she responded that she figured it was something like that, because she knows Michael tends to twist things. The fact that she didn't automatically believe his version made me feel less alone, and I reminded myself that people who actually matter would ask me directly, instead of just believing vague social media drama from someone who never posts, except when he wants sympathy. My second therapy session with Emmeline happened the next afternoon, and I told her about the social media post and how hard it was not to defend myself publicly. She nodded and said that was actually perfect timing because today we were going to practice specific scripts for saying no without justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining, which she called the JADE technique that people-pleasers use to try to make others understand their boundaries. We spent almost 30 minutes just practicing me saying, "I'm not available to help with that," over and over until I could say it without my voice shaking or adding explanations like, "because I already spent so much," or "I really wish I could but." Emmeline explained that every time I add a justification, I'm opening a door for the other person to argue with my reasons, and the goal is to close that door by making my boundary a simple statement of fact rather than something up for debate. Then she helped me identify the physical feelings that come with guilt and people-pleasing, like how my chest gets tight, and my hands start to sweat and I feel this urgent need to fix things immediately, so I can recognize when I'm responding from old programming instead of making a current choice. By the end of the session, I felt more prepared for future confrontations because I had concrete skills instead of just hoping I'd be strong enough in the moment. I got to test those skills sooner than expected because Mom texted me the very next morning asking for a small loan of $300 for groceries because money was tight this month. The old me would have sent the money within 5 minutes while feeling resentful, but instead I sat with the request for a full hour and noticed all the physical sensations Emmeline had helped me identify. My chest got tight and I felt this wave of panic like I was responsible for whether my mom ate or not, but I made myself breathe through it and use the script we'd practiced. I typed back that I wasn't able to help with that, but I could send her information about the local food bank and budget counseling services that might be useful. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I had to physically put my phone in a drawer because I knew the response would be bad. When I finally checked 20 minutes later, Mom had sent 3 paragraphs about how cruel I was being, and how she never thought her own daughter would treat her like a charity case and suggest she go to a food bank like some kind of stranger. I felt the guilt trying to pull me back in, felt my fingers wanting to type an apology, and offer to send the money anyway, but I made myself remember that offering resources instead of money is actually more helpful long-term, even if it feels harsh in the moment. I didn't respond to her follow-up messages and reminded myself that silence was also a boundary. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Dad called me 2 days later and asked if I'd be willing to do a 3-way call with him and Michael to try to work things out, and I agreed because Dad had been reasonable when I showed him the spreadsheet. I felt my old patterns wanting to kick in, wanting to smooth things over, and maybe offer something small just to make peace, but I made myself stay calm and stated clearly that I spent $5,000 on a party I wasn't obligated to fund at all. Michael's voice got louder and more aggressive, saying I was twisting things and making myself look like some kind of martyr, when really I was just cheap and selfish, and I could hear him building up to one of his usual rants where he'd talk over me until I gave in. But then Dad surprised me by cutting Michael off mid-sentence and saying that the party was generous, that he'd talked to the school counselor himself, and the bullying claims didn't match what Judy reported about Sophia's actual social situation. Michael tried to argue, but Dad stayed firm, and I felt this weird mix of relief and disbelief because Dad had never backed me up against Michael before in our entire lives. The call ended with Michael saying we were all against him and hanging up, but I didn't feel guilty about it because for once I'd held my boundary without caving or apologizing. After that difficult call, I met with Harvey again at his office and explained that I needed a clear record of everything I'd paid for over the years, not as a demand for repayment, but as proof if anyone tried to claim I never helped or that they contributed equally. Harvey pulled up the spreadsheet we'd created before and helped me turn it into a simple template with just dates, descriptions, and amounts. No emotional commentary or accusations. We went through each entry and made sure I had documentation like bank statements or receipts, and Harvey suggested I keep digital copies in cloud storage and email a copy to myself so I'd always have access if needed. The document ended up being 3 pages long, and seeing it all laid out so cleanly made me feel less defensive because I had proof if anyone tried to rewrite history or claim I was exaggerating. Harvey also helped me set up a system where any new expenses for family would go into a separate tracking sheet automatically, so I wouldn't have to manually remember to document things if I chose to help in the future. Having these systems in place made me feel more in control, because I wasn't just relying on memory or willpower, I had actual structures protecting my boundaries. Work got really stressful the following week with a major project deadline approaching, and I noticed the old urge to make a peacekeeping payment to family, just to reduce my overall stress and get them to stop bothering me. My phone had been buzzing with messages from Mom and Michael, and I found myself thinking that maybe if I just sent $500 or covered one bill, then they'd back off and I could focus on work without this constant background pressure. I actually opened my banking app and started to set up a transfer before I caught myself, and remembered Emmeline's 72-hour rule. I closed the app and told myself I could revisit the decision in 3 days, and if I still wanted to make a payment after that waiting period, then I could. I wrote the date and time in my phone notes so I'd remember when the 72 hours were up, and then I forced myself to focus on work, instead of checking my phone every 5 minutes. By the time 3 days passed, the urge had completely faded, and I felt proud of myself for not caving under pressure. The work deadline got met, the family drama didn't actually get worse from me not sending money, and I realized that my anxiety about what would happen if I didn't pay was usually worse than what actually happened when I held the boundary. I got an email from Judy a few days later, letting me know she'd scheduled a conversation with Michael about the school rumors and Sophia's actual social situation. She explained that she was concerned parental pressure was contributing to Sophia's anxiety more than peer dynamics, and that part of supporting Sophia meant helping his parents understand realistic expectations and stop the constant comparisons to other families. Judy wrote that she wanted to give me a heads up because Michael might not react well to the conversation, but she felt it was necessary for Sophia's well-being. She emphasized that her job was to support students, and sometimes that meant having difficult conversations with parents about how home dynamics affect kids at the school. Reading her email made me feel relieved that a professional was introducing accountability into Michael's parenting approach, because I'd been worried that my boundaries with money might somehow hurt Sophia, even though logically I knew the problem was Michael's behavior, not my financial limits. Judy's email confirmed that the real issue was Michael's pressure and comparisons, not anything about party budgets or what I did or didn't spend. Michael called me that same evening absolutely furious about the school counselor interfering in family business, and he accused me of dragging the school into our private issues to make him look bad. His voice was loud and aggressive right from the start, not even pretending to be calm, and he went on this long rant about how I'd weaponized the school against him and turned them against his parenting. I let him talk for about 30 seconds, and then I interrupted calmly to explain that I contacted the school, because I was concerned about Sophia's well-being after hearing bullying claims, and that Judy's job is to support students, which sometimes means talking to parents about home dynamics. Michael tried to talk over me, but I kept my voice level, and repeated that I'd done nothing wrong by checking on my nephew's actual situation at the school, instead of just believing secondhand claims. He got louder and started bringing up old grievances about how I always thought I was better than him, and I could hear that he was spiraling into his usual pattern of trying to make me feel guilty and defensive. But this time I didn't engage with the bait. I just stated one more time that Judy was doing her job, and I stood by my decision to contact the school, and then I said I needed to go. Michael kept talking, but I ended the call anyway, and even though my hands were shaking afterward, I felt strong for not apologizing, or backing down from a decision I knew was right. Mom called the next day in a complete panic, claiming the utility company was shutting off her power tomorrow unless she paid $600 immediately, and I felt my heart start racing with that old fear of being responsible for her suffering. She was crying and saying she didn't know what to do, and she'd already called everyone else and I was her last hope, and the urgency in her voice triggered all my old programming about being the family safety net. But I made myself take a breath and told her I needed to verify the situation first before making any decisions, and she got quiet in this weird way that made my stomach drop. I said I'd call her back, and then I immediately looked up the utility company's customer service number and called them directly. The representative looked up Mom's account and confirmed that her account was current with no past due balance and no shutoff scheduled, and she said there had been no shutoff notices sent in the past 6 months. I felt this sick feeling spread through my chest as I realized Mom had completely made up the emergency to manipulate money from me, and the realization was both devastating and clarifying. I'd suspected she exaggerated situations before, but this was a straight-up lie, and it made me wonder how many other emergencies over the years had been manufactured to trigger my guilt and get me to send money. I called Mom back and told her I'd spoken to the utility company and knew there was no shutoff scheduled, and she got defensive and said she must have misunderstood the notice or maybe she was thinking of a different bill, but I didn't engage with the excuses. I just said I wouldn't be able to help and ended the call. I spent that evening drafting a final message to both Michael and Mom, stating that all future financial discussions must go through Dad as a neutral party, and I would not respond to direct requests for money or engage in conversations about family finances one-on-one. The boundary felt extreme but necessary because clearly the direct pressure and manipulation tactics weren't going to stop just because I said no a few times. I explained that this wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about creating a structure that removed me from the middle of constant financial drama while still allowing for family communication through Dad. I sent the message to both of them and copied Dad, and then I called Dad separately to make sure he was actually willing to take on this role. Dad said he'd been thinking about it since our last conversation, and he agreed to be the point person for any family financial discussions, because he was finally seeing how the direct pressure and manipulation tactics had been used against me for years. He admitted he should have stepped in sooner, and he wanted to help create healthier family dynamics, even if it meant some uncomfortable conversations. Having Dad agree to this role made the boundary feel more real and sustainable, because I wasn't just hoping I'd be strong enough to keep saying no. I had an actual system in place that physically removed me from the direct line of fire. 3 days passed before my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. I picked it up expecting another guilt trip from Mom or Michael, but instead I saw a message that made my eyes water. The text said, "Thanks for the party, it really was great. Sorry my dad made it weird." And then a second message came through asking if we could plan something low-key for my birthday. I sat on my couch staring at those words because this was the first time any family member had actually acknowledged that the party was good, and that Michael's behavior was the problem instead of my spending. My chest felt tight with something that wasn't guilt or anger, just this small spark of hope that maybe my relationship with Sophia could be healthy, even if things with Michael stayed messy. I wiped my eyes and typed back a response suggesting we plan a simple outing together, maybe checking out the new art museum downtown, or trying that Thai restaurant everyone kept talking about. I added that I valued spending time with him way more than expensive celebrations, and his response came fast, saying he'd love that, and asking if we could look at museum schedules together. The back and forth felt different from any family interaction I'd had in months, because we were planning something together instead of me just showing up to something an adult organized and funded, and the whole conversation reminded me that real connection didn't require massive spending or fancy productions. I screenshotted the messages and saved them in a folder on my phone labeled Good Stuff, which I'd started after my therapy intake to collect evidence that setting boundaries didn't mean losing everyone I cared about. My phone rang an hour later with Dad's name on the screen, and I answered, wondering if this was going to be another mediation attempt or guilt trip. But Dad's voice sounded different, more serious and less uncertain than usual, and he told me he'd had a really hard conversation with Mom and Michael about the family money situation. He explained that he'd laid out the spreadsheet I showed him and made them both sit there, while he went through every single payment I'd made over the years, and he'd set his own boundary that he wouldn't listen to complaints about me unless they could acknowledge the $47,000 I'd contributed. Dad said Michael had tried to argue that family helps family, and I was just doing what aunts do, but Dad shut that down by pointing out that Michael's other sister hadn't paid for a single birthday party or tutoring session in 16 years. He'd also offered to help Michael create a realistic budget and take over some of the costs that had been pushed onto me, like Sophia's insurance and soccer fees. And while I felt skeptical about how long this would last, having Dad actually involved and taking action felt like a huge shift. I thanked him and admitted I was surprised he'd stepped up like this, and he said he should have done it years ago instead of staying out of money discussions and assuming everything was fine. We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics and boundaries, and when we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, because at least one parent was finally seeing the situation clearly, instead of expecting me to just keep sacrificing. My therapy appointment with Emmeline happened 2 days later in her office downtown, which had comfortable chairs and soft lighting that made it easier to talk about hard things. She'd reviewed my intake notes and the homework I'd done about family patterns, and she started the session by asking how I was feeling about losing my identity as the good daughter who makes everyone happy. I hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms before, but hearing her say it out loud made something click in my brain, because that's exactly what I'd been grieving. We spent the next 40 minutes working through the weird mix of relief and loss that came with setting boundaries, and she helped me understand that I could still have relationships with family members without being their personal bank account. Emmeline taught me some specific scripts for my upcoming birthday that would protect my boundaries while staying connected, like saying I'm not available for that instead of explaining or defending my choices. She pointed out that real love doesn't require constant money sacrifice, and that the relationships worth keeping would survive me having limits. And hearing this from a professional helped push back against the lifetime of think of your brother programming that still played in my head sometimes. We practiced the scripts until I could say them without my voice shaking or feeling the need to add justifications, and she gave me homework to notice when I felt guilty and write down what triggered it so we could work on those patterns. I left her office feeling more prepared for whatever came next, and I stopped at a coffee shop on the way home to sit with my thoughts before diving back into family drama. The barista was friendly and the coffee was good, and I let myself enjoy 20 minutes of peace before checking my phone and seeing 3 missed calls from Michael. I didn't call back right away because Emmeline's 72-hour rule meant I could wait before responding to anything that felt like pressure. And I spent the evening organizing my apartment and meal prepping for the week instead of obsessing over what Michael might want. The next afternoon, I was working from home when my doorbell rang, and I looked through the peephole to see Michael standing there holding a cardboard box. I opened the door but stayed in the doorway instead of inviting him in, and he immediately launched into asking if I could help him organize old receipts and documents for his taxes since I was good with money. The request felt so typical that I almost laughed because here he was again trying to get my time and expertise for free after everything that had happened. I recognized this as another test of my boundaries, so I took a breath and declined his request, then pulled up the library website on my phone and showed him information about a free tax preparation class they offered every Saturday. Michael's face went from hopeful to frustrated in about 3 seconds, and he muttered something about how it would have been faster if I just helped him, but I held firm and said the class would teach him skills he could use every year. He left looking annoyed, but I closed the door feeling proud of myself for maintaining the boundary, even when he was being polite instead of aggressive. And I texted Emmeline a quick update about the interaction because she'd asked me to track these moments. An email notification popped up on my laptop that evening from Judy Nguyen at Sophia's school, and I opened it expecting maybe another update about counseling sessions or social dynamics. Instead, Judy wrote that the rumors about Sophia's party had completely quieted down at the school, and she wanted me to know that he'd joined an after-school club for art and design, where he was making friends and building confidence separate from his parents' constant social comparisons. She thanked me for being a stable adult in Sophia's life, who advocated for his actual well-being, rather than using him as a tool in family drama. And she said my willingness to verify the bullying claims instead of just throwing money at the problem had shown real care for his emotional health. Reading her professional validation helped ease some of the guilt I still carried about the boundaries I'd set with Michael and Mom, because here was an objective third party saying that what I was doing was actually good for Sophia instead of selfish or harmful. I printed the email and added it to a physical folder I'd started keeping with the spreadsheet and other documentation, not because I planned to use it as ammunition, but because I needed tangible reminders that I wasn't crazy or wrong for protecting myself. My next meeting with Harvey happened at his office 3 days later, and we spent an hour reviewing all the financial protections we'd put in place over the past few weeks. He pulled up my accounts on his computer and showed me that the alerts were working perfectly. My credit was locked down tight. All automatic payments to family members had been successfully canceled. And my secret savings account had already grown by $1,200 in just a few weeks. Harvey walked me through setting up automatic transfers to savings, so the money would move out of my checking account before I could even see it sitting there tempting me during family emergencies. And watching my financial security increase on the screen made me feel powerful, instead of guilty for the first time in years. He reminded me that having systems in place made boundary holding much easier than relying on willpower alone, and he suggested we schedule another check-in for 3 months out to make sure everything was still working smoothly. I left his office feeling like I'd built a fortress around my finances, and the sense of control was almost intoxicating after decades of feeling like my money belonged to everyone but me. That weekend, I sat down with my laptop and finalized my birthday plans by creating an event invitation for a small dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant downtown. I wrote out the details with clear expectations that felt scary but necessary to include. I stated that I was paying for my own meal as my gift to myself. Everyone else would pay their own way if they chose to attend, and the focus was on spending time together, rather than gifts or fancy gestures. I sent the invitation to my close friends first, and got immediate enthusiastic responses. Then I took a deep breath and sent it to the family group chat with Dad, Mom, Michael, and Sophia. The act of planning my own birthday without hoping someone else would make it special felt like reclaiming something important about valuing myself, and I refused to let the old voice in my head tell me I was being selfish or difficult. My birthday morning arrived with sunshine streaming through my apartment windows, and I was making coffee when my phone rang with Mom's name on the screen. I answered expecting a simple happy birthday, but instead Mom launched into a proposal about the family taking me out to dinner at this expensive steakhouse across town, if I agreed to pay for everyone since I had the money now, and it would be my gift to the family. I actually laughed out loud at the sheer audacity before I could stop myself, and I heard Mom's confused silence on the other end. I explained that I already had plans with friends at the restaurant I'd chosen, and that I'd sent the invitation to the family chat 3 days ago, with all the details. Mom's silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, but then she said, "Oh," in this small voice that told me she genuinely expected me to fund my own birthday celebration for the entire family, just like I had every other year. I kept my tone friendly but firm as I wished her a good day, and ended the call. Then I stood in my kitchen feeling this weird mix of sadness and satisfaction, because the old me would have canceled my plans and paid for everyone without a second thought. That afternoon, my doorbell rang and I opened it to find Dad standing there holding a small wrapped package and looking slightly nervous. He came inside and handed me the gift, which turned out to be a framed photo of the two of us from when I was maybe 7 years old, both of us covered in paint from some art project we'd done together in the garage. Dad's voice was quiet as he told me he was proud of me for standing up for myself, even though it had been hard on everyone. And he admitted he should have paid more attention to the family money dynamics years ago, instead of staying out of it and assuming Mom had everything under control. He said he couldn't fix the past, but he was committed to being more aware and supportive going forward, and he wanted me to know that my boundaries were reasonable and necessary, even if they made some people uncomfortable. His simple acknowledgement meant more than any expensive present ever could, and I hugged him tight, while trying not to cry because this was the first time in my entire life that a parent had validated my feelings without adding a but or asking me to think of my brother. We sat on my couch for an hour just talking about memories and life and his plans to help Michael get his finances in order. And when he left, I put the framed photo on my bookshelf where I could see it every day, as a reminder that at least one person in my family saw me as more than a wallet. I got ready for dinner that evening feeling genuinely excited instead of anxious. And when I arrived at the restaurant, I found my friends already gathered at a big table near the window. Troy had brought a funny card that made everyone laugh. My coworker Sarah had organized a group gift of art supplies I'd been wanting, and the whole evening felt light and fun in a way my birthdays never had before. I raised my glass to toast, choosing peace over approval, and Troy joked that I should send the bill to Michael as a learning experience. And everyone laughed while I felt this deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with expensive decorations or elaborate productions. Near the end of dinner, Sophia showed up looking slightly nervous, and carrying a handmade birthday card decorated with drawings and inside jokes from our conversations over the past few weeks. He quietly told me he'd talked to Dad about stopping the constant comparisons to other families, and hearing that he was advocating for himself and trying to create change in the family dynamic made me incredibly proud. I introduced him to my friends, and he stayed for dessert, and watching him relax and joke around with people who weren't judging him or comparing him to anyone else reminded me why all the boundary setting and discomfort had been worth it. That evening, I walked into the restaurant and spotted my friends already gathered around a big table near the window. Troy waved me over, and everyone stood up to hug me, and the warmth in the room felt completely different from any family birthday I'd ever had. We ordered appetizers and drinks, and the conversation flowed easily without anyone asking about family drama or money or what I should be doing differently. Sarah from work had organized a group gift of art supplies I'd been wanting, and when I opened the bag and saw the high-quality paints and brushes inside, I actually teared up a little because someone had paid attention to what I cared about. Troy made a joke about how I could finally afford to buy my own supplies instead of funding other people's lives, and everyone laughed in that knowing way that told me they understood what I'd been dealing with. I raised my glass and looked around at these people who genuinely cared about me as a person, rather than what I could provide. To choosing peace over approval, I said, and everyone clinked glasses while Troy added that I should send tonight's bill to Michael as a learning experience. The laughter that followed felt light and genuine, and I realized this was the first birthday celebration in years, where I wasn't managing anyone's expectations, or secretly calculating costs, or worrying about whether I'd done enough. We spent the next hour eating and talking and sharing stories, and I felt this deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with expensive decorations or elaborate productions. Near the end of dinner, I saw movement by the entrance and looked up to see Sophia walking toward our table. He was carrying something in his hands, and looked a little nervous as he approached. I stood up and gave him a hug, and he handed me a handmade birthday card decorated with drawings and inside jokes from our conversations over the past few weeks. The card had little sketches of things we'd talked about, a coffee cup from the cafe where we'd met, a book I'd recommended, and a funny cartoon version of me giving advice. I opened it and read the message inside, which was simple but meant everything. He'd written about how much he appreciated me being honest with him, and treating him like a person instead of a prize to show off. Then he quietly told me he'd talked to Dad about stopping the constant comparisons to other families. I told him it makes me feel like nothing I do is ever good enough, Sophia said, and I could hear the effort it had taken for him to speak up. His willingness to advocate for himself and try to create change in the family dynamic made me incredibly proud. I introduced him to my friends, and he stayed for dessert, and watching him relax and joke around with people who weren't judging him, or comparing him to anyone else, reminded me exactly why all the boundary setting and discomfort had been worth it. When dinner wrapped up and people started heading out, I walked toward the parking lot with Sophia beside me. That's when I noticed Michael sitting in his car near the exit, and my stomach tightened because I hadn't expected to see him here. Sophia saw him too and gave me an awkward look before saying goodbye and heading toward his dad's car. I walked over slowly, not sure what to expect, and Michael rolled down his window. He looked uncomfortable, his hands gripping the steering wheel, and he admitted he didn't know if he was welcome inside. I didn't say anything at first, just waited to see what he wanted. He reached over to the passenger seat and picked up a folder, then handed it to me through the window. Inside was a document I'd lent him years ago for some paperwork he needed, something I'd honestly forgotten about. "I'm working on figuring things out," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. It wasn't an apology, and it definitely wasn't real accountability, but it was the first time he'd acknowledged any responsibility without immediately making demands or accusations. I stood there holding the folder and took a breath, deciding to offer something without expecting anything in return. I told him that if he ever wanted to start making small payments toward what I'd covered over the years, I had a simple template that broke everything into manageable amounts with no pressure or timeline. I emphasized that I wasn't demanding repayment but offering a structure if he chose to take that step. His face showed genuine surprise, like he'd expected me to either demand money immediately or pretend the debt didn't exist. "You're leaving it up to me?" he asked, and I nodded. I explained that I'd done the math and had everything documented, but whether he did anything about it was his choice. He sat quietly for a moment, then said he'd think about it, and I walked away feeling lighter because I'd offered a path forward without compromising my boundaries. The next night, I was sitting on my couch watching TV when my phone rang with Mom's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up and her voice sounded different from usual. She launched into what was clearly a prepared speech, offering an apology that came out halting and awkward. She talked about her own difficult upbringing, and how she was taught to prioritize sons over daughters, how her own mother had done the same thing to her. She didn't have full insight into the harm she'd caused, and she kept including justifications about how things were different back then, and how she thought she was doing the right thing. But her tone was softer than I'd ever heard it, and she admitted that maybe she'd pushed too hard about Michael, and hadn't paid enough attention to what I needed. I recognized this as the closest thing to accountability I was likely to get from her right now, so I didn't push for more. Instead, I clearly stated what I needed going forward. No more comparisons between me and Michael. No more conversations about money or what I should be spending on family. Respect for my boundaries even when she didn't fully understand them. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the reluctance in her voice when she agreed to try. I accepted that this was progress even if it wasn't the complete transformation I might wish for, because real change happens slowly and imperfectly. 2 weeks passed with relative quiet, and I fell into a routine that felt more stable than anything I'd experienced in years. Then I got an email from Harvey with the subject line, "Milestone Achievement," and I opened it to find a congratulatory message. My emergency fund had hit its first milestone of $5,000, the exact same amount I'd spent on Sophia's party, but this time saved for my own security and future. I sat staring at that number on my screen and felt this surge of pride mixed with relief. I decided to celebrate the win by taking myself out to a nice dinner, something I would have felt guilty about before because that money could have gone to family. But as I sat alone at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try, I acknowledged that every dollar I saved for myself instead of spending on family drama was an investment in my own well-being and independence. The following week, I had my follow-up session with Emmeline, and we spent the hour processing everything that had happened since my birthday. She helped me work through the mixed emotions of grief for the family relationships I'd wished I had, and relief at the healthier boundaries I'd established. We created a maintenance plan for handling future requests or guilt trips, including specific reminder phrases I could use when I felt old patterns pulling at me. "I'm not available for that," became my go-to response, along with, "That doesn't work for me," and "I've already made my decision." Emmeline emphasized that boundary setting was an ongoing practice rather than a one-time fix, which helped me feel less pressure to be perfect at this new way of relating to my family. A few days later, I received an email from Judy Nguyen with an update about Sophia. She let me know he'd started regular sessions with the school counselor to work on anxiety management and building self-esteem, separate from parental expectations. She mentioned that Sophia was doing much better and showing more confidence in expressing his own needs and opinions, and knowing that he was getting professional support made me feel less worried about how the family changes might be affecting him. That same afternoon, Dad sent me an email about organizing a budget planning session with Michael. He made it clear that I wasn't involved and didn't need to be, respecting the boundaries I'd set about staying out of Michael's financial situation. But he reported that they'd identified one major expense Michael could cut to start building his own emergency fund, something about a streaming service bundle and eating out less frequently. It was a small step and I wasn't holding my breath for dramatic change. But the fact that Michael had shown up and participated suggested he might be starting to take some responsibility for his own financial situation, instead of expecting me to fund everything forever. A few weeks after that conversation with Dad, my phone buzzed while I was making dinner. The notification showed a text from Michael with an image attached. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the message. The screenshot showed a payment confirmation for $150 with a note that said, "Sophia tutoring bill, first installment." Below the image, Michael had typed a short message about working on paying back what he could. I stared at the screen for a minute, feeling this weird mix of surprise and caution. My first instinct was to send back something enthusiastic with lots of exclamation points and thank yous, but I stopped myself and typed a simple response instead. I wrote that I received it and appreciated the payment. No extra praise or celebration, because this was his responsibility, not some amazing gift I needed to throw a party over. Still, as I set my phone down and went back to cooking, I couldn't help noticing this was the first time he'd voluntarily paid for something without me asking or anyone pressuring him. That evening, I pulled out the thick folder where I'd been keeping all the family financial records for the past decade. The thing was stuffed with receipts, bank statements, and my handwritten notes tracking every payment. I sat at my kitchen table and methodically made copies of everything, organizing the duplicates into a new folder for my personal files. Each page reminded me of a different sacrifice or expense: the mortgage help, the tutoring costs, the party expenses. When I finished copying, I closed the original folder and carried it to my closet. I put it on the top shelf behind some boxes. The record still existed if I ever needed proof of anything, but I was choosing not to let this spreadsheet of past payments control my daily thoughts anymore. Filing it away felt like making space in my brain for things beyond family financial drama. The next morning, I opened the family group chat on my phone. I'd been thinking about this for days, planning exactly what to say. I typed out a message proposing new rules for how we communicate. No more group discussions about money or personal conflicts. Individual text threads for one-on-one conversations only. Group chat reserved for neutral family updates and planning things like holiday dinners. I read it over 3 times before hitting send, expecting immediate pushback or arguments. Instead, Mom responded first saying she thought that sounded fair. Then Dad agreed. Even Michael sent a thumbs-up emoji. I sat there staring at my phone in disbelief. Were they actually going to try this? I knew it wouldn't be perfect, and someone would probably break the rules eventually. But having some basic guidelines felt like another small step toward healthier family dynamics. 3 weeks after that, I walked into a small art gallery I'd passed 100 times but never entered. I'd been thinking about buying something for my apartment for years. Every time I considered it before, that voice in my head would start calculating. How much could this money help with Michael's mortgage? What if Sophia needed something for school? What if Mom had an emergency? But today I walked in anyway. I spent an hour looking at different pieces before finding one that made me stop. It was a painting of a city street with bright colors and interesting shadows. The price tag said $400. I pulled out my credit card without hesitation. No second guessing. No mental gymnastics about whether I should save this money for potential family crises. When I got home, I cleared a space on my living room wall and hung the painting. I sat on my couch looking at it for a long time. The 11-year-old version of me had given away her art contest winnings without question. The 32-year-old version had just bought art for herself and felt completely okay about it. The family relationships were smaller now and more complicated, but I felt content with my choices. That night, I went through my normal bedtime routine, washing my face and brushing my teeth. As I climbed into bed, I found myself thinking about how everything had shifted over the past 2 months. I talked to Mom and Michael less frequently now. Our conversations were shorter and more careful. We weren't as close as we used to be, but we were also clearer and more honest than we'd ever been. Everyone was adjusting with imperfect steps. Mom still occasionally hinted about needing help. Michael sometimes backslid into entitled comments. But nobody was pretending anymore that the old dynamics were healthy or okay. I was learning something important. Real family connection didn't require me to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. That's where we'll wrap things up for today. I'm so glad you joined me. It really makes sharing these stories feel meaningful. Hopefully this one added a little light or comfort to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to keep that feeling going.